Have you ever built something with your bare hands, something you poured your soul into just to watch someone else put their name on it and walk away with everything? Yeah, that happened to me. And what came next? Let's just say, they never saw me coming. Before I get into how I turned the tables, I need you to understand who I was when it all started. I wasn't some genius tech CEO or some master manipulator. I was just a regular guy. 38, married, 2 kids, mortgage, and a habit of drinking too much coffee. My name's Michael Dawson, and at the time I was working as a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company out of Austin, Texas. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I loved what I did. I was the guy people came to when the code broke or when the system slowed down. I liked solving problems, making things run smoother. I wasn't the loudest in meetings. I wasn't trying to climb the corporate ladder or steal the spotlight, but I did take pride in my work, and I thought naively that loyalty meant something. I spent over 6 years at that company, missed birthdays, skipped vacations, pulled all-nighters to deliver on impossible deadlines. I was never the guy who complained. I believed that eventually hard work would speak louder than politics. Then I created something big. It started as a side experiment. We had been dealing with high server costs for months, and I figured out a way to optimize our back-end infrastructure using a new compression protocol I'd been tinkering with. It cut costs by 60% in early tests. I couldn't believe it myself. So I did what any loyal employee would do. I documented it, wrote up a proposal, and scheduled a meeting with our CTO, Daniel Kravitz. At first, he seemed impressed. "This could change everything," he said. I walked out of that meeting on cloud 9. I thought, maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the breakthrough I needed to move up, to finally be recognized. But I didn't realize then. That meeting was the beginning of the biggest betrayal of my life. And the people I trusted the most? They were already sharpening their knives behind my back. So before we dive into how I exposed them, dismantled their little empire and came out on top, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated. Drop a comment if you've been betrayed at work, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, this story only gets crazier from here. Before any of this madness started, before I was called a whistleblower, before lawyers, headlines, and betrayals, I was just Mike. People at work called me Dawson, like we were in some old-school military unit or something. I liked it. It made me feel part of something. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Houston. My dad worked at a warehouse his whole life. My mum was a nurse. They didn't go to college, but they worked their fingers to the bone to make sure I could. I got a scholarship in computer science, worked weekends fixing printers and building PCs for classmates just to scrape by. When I finally landed a job in tech, it felt like I'd made it. I didn't care that the office was in a dingy strip mall or that my first desk was basically a repurposed folding table. I had a badge, a title, and a shot. That was enough. By the time I joined Horizon Link, I had already paid my dues. I'd worked through buggy launches, emergency patches at 3 a.m., and managers who barely knew what we actually did. But Horizon felt different, at first. It was a growing mid-tier tech company with big dreams, and they treated engineers like real assets. The first year was golden. Great team, challenging work, and a culture that made you believe your effort actually mattered. I had 2 kids by then, Jason and Lily, and my wife Amber had left her job to take care of them full-time. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We had just bought a small house on the east side, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't flashy. I didn't drive a Tesla. I still brought my own lunch to work. I didn't care about being the smartest guy in the room. What mattered to me was creating things that worked, and doing it right. That's why when I came up with the algorithm, I didn't think for a second about selling it on my own or keeping it under wraps. My first instinct was to help the company, to do what was right. I didn't know back then that the same people I trusted with my idea were already looking for ways to steal it out from under me. They say success brings out people's true colors, but betrayal strips them down to the bone. And soon, I'd see just how far some folks were willing to go to protect their own ambitions, even if it meant destroying mine. It all started with a bottleneck. Our infrastructure team had been fighting rising server costs for months. Every solution we tried was like slapping duct tape on a sinking ship. We'd migrate some workloads to cheaper regions, cut back on redundancy, tweak compression settings. Nothing stuck. And every time the finance team came around, they'd point fingers at engineering like it was our fault money was evaporating. I couldn't stop thinking about it, not just because I cared about the company, but because I knew there had to be a better way. My mind kept coming back to an old idea I had back in college, a lightweight compression logic I never finished. Back then it was just a fun side project, but now it could be the solution no one else had thought of. So I stayed late, a lot. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I was obsessed. While most of the office emptied out by 6, I was still there at 9, 11, sometimes past midnight, eyes burning in front of 3 screens. I brought sleeping bags for my kids on weekends and let them nap in the server room while I ran simulations. And then one night, something clicked. It was 2:37 a.m. I remember because the microwave timer buzzed right as my test script finished running. I checked the log and I had to rub my eyes. The new prototype dropped our processing load by almost half and reduced bandwidth usage by 62%. I thought it was a fluke. I ran it again, and again, and again. Same result. Every time. I sat there for a minute, just staring at the screen. I wasn't even excited yet. It was more like disbelief, like I'd stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to find. Over the next week, I cleaned up the code, ran it across different data sets, ran stress tests, performance comparisons. It held up. Not just held up, it dominated. I put everything into a proposal. Diagrams, cost estimates, implementation plans. I named it Project Ghostframe, partly because it was invisible to users, but also because I knew if this thing ever got noticed, it could haunt some very powerful people who were benefiting from inefficiency. I didn't tell anyone except Amber. She smiled, hugged me, and said, "Just make sure they don't steal it from you." I laughed. I shouldn't have, because those words, half joke, half warning, would echo in my head for months to come. When I first presented Project Ghostframe to Daniel Kravitz, our CTO, I thought I was handing him gold. We sat down in one of those glass-walled meeting rooms that look impressive but offer zero privacy. I walked him through the proposal, showed the performance benchmarks, the cost savings. I had spreadsheets, graphs, even a short demo on my laptop, and the whole time he just sat there, arms crossed, nodding slowly, occasionally raising an eyebrow like he was trying not to look too impressed. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This could change everything." I couldn't help but smile. That one sentence felt like validation for all those sleepless nights. "I'll need to run this by Lisa and the rest of the product team," he added. "But yeah, this is impressive, Mike, very impressive." He clapped me on the shoulder like a proud uncle. I walked out of that room feeling 10 feet tall. I remember texting Amber right after. He loved it. Might actually be getting somewhere. But over the next few days, when something felt off, I didn't hear back from Daniel, no follow-up meetings, no emails, no Slack messages. Ghostframe vanished into the void like it never existed. At first, I figured he was just busy, but then Lisa Byrne, our product manager, started acting weird. Lisa and I had worked closely on other projects. She was smart, sharp-tongued, and usually pretty transparent. But when I asked her casually if she'd seen my proposal, she paused, looked down, then said, "Oh yeah, I think Daniel mentioned something about it. Not sure where that landed." It was like watching someone try to lie with a mouthful of marbles. That was the first time I felt it. Not suspicion, but a quiet discomfort, a gut-level itch I couldn't scratch. Something was being hidden, or worse, taken. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe it just needed more time. But the silence dragged on. And then, one morning during the all-hands meeting, Daniel presented a new internal initiative designed to optimize infrastructure and reduce server costs. He called it the Phase Red Protocol. He even used one of my performance charts, slightly modified but unmistakably mine. He never said my name. I sat there frozen. I remember my coffee going cold in my hands. My heart wasn't racing. It just sank. Quiet, heavy, like a weight pulling me under the table. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, a misunderstanding, but deep down I knew better. That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of the plan anymore. After that all-hands meeting, something in me cracked. Watching Daniel present my work, rebranded and repackaged without a trace of my name, was like watching someone else wear your face and get applauded for it. The worst part? People were clapping, nodding, commenting in Slack, like it was some brilliant stroke of leadership. And I just sat there, invisible. That night I barely spoke a word at home. Amber noticed. She asked if everything was okay, and I said, "It's probably nothing." I didn't want to believe what I was starting to suspect, but over the next few weeks, it only got worse. I followed up with Daniel, politely, respectfully, just a, "Hey, any update on Ghost Frame? Would love to contribute to the implementation." He replied once, short and vague, "It's in early planning. I'll loop you in if we move forward." That was it. I was never looped in. Then came the internal reorg. Out of nowhere, I was reassigned from the core systems team to a support unit called Legacy Ops. It was basically digital janitorial work, fixing old bugs in modules nobody used anymore, the kind of work you give people when you want them to quit on their own. No explanation, no warning, just a sterile email from HR and a cold smile from Daniel in the hallway. I went to Lisa. She was one of the few people I still trusted, at least I thought I did. I found her in the break room and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a sec?" She didn't look up from her phone. "What's up?" I told her I'd been moved off core development and asked if she knew what was going on. She paused for a second too long, then she said, "I think it came from higher up, strategic shift or something. You know how it is." But I could see it in her eyes. She knew. And that broke something in me, not just because of what they were doing, but because she wouldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Lisa had been in the room when I first pitched Ghost Frame. She'd seen the raw numbers, the potential. She knew exactly where that project came from, and now suddenly she was treating me like I had a contagious disease. I left that conversation feeling like I was the crazy one, like maybe I had imagined it all. But deep down the truth was setting in. They had taken my idea, and now they were trying to erase me from it completely. And the silence? That was their way of making sure I stayed erased. I didn't even know there was going to be a board presentation until someone from finance let it slip over lunch. "Big pitch today," she said. "Dan's showing off that new optimization system. Supposedly it's going to save the company millions." My stomach turned. I didn't need to ask what she was talking about. I knew exactly which new optimization system she meant. I should have walked away, should have gone home. But something in me, maybe pride, maybe masochism, pushed me to watch it happen. The board presentation was held in the main conference room, sleek, intimidating, all glass and leather and filtered air. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I stood outside in the hallway, just close enough to see the slides as they flicked past on the screen inside. There it was, my algorithm rebranded as PhaseRed, like it was some cutting-edge tech from Daniel's own imagination. Same metrics, same architecture, same damn logic flow I had mapped out in my kitchen at 2 a.m. while my kids slept upstairs. Daniel stood at the front, pointing at slides, talking about his team's innovation and proprietary enhancements. Lisa sat next to him, nodding along, smiling like she'd just won the lottery. I stood there, frozen. Part of me wanted to burst into the room and scream, to flip the table and shove my laptop in front of the board and show them everything. But I didn't, because in that moment, I realized something chilling. They weren't just stealing from me. They were rewriting history, in real time. And no one else knew. No one else cared. The board applauded at the end. One of the members even stood up to shake Daniel's hand. "This is the kind of thinking we need," he said. I watched through the glass like a ghost, invisible in my own story. After the meeting, I tried to talk to Daniel. I asked if he had time to chat. He smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Now's not a good time. Let's connect later." I never heard from him again. That night, I sat in my car in the parking garage for over an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the dashboard, numb. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd poured into that company, it was gone, stolen. And no one even blinked. But that was the moment the numbness turned into something else. Not sadness, not defeat. Something sharper, colder. Revenge didn't come to me all at once. But in that parking lot, it was born. A week after the board presentation, the official memo came in. It wasn't even personalized, just a mass email from HR about departmental restructuring. A few roles were being realigned to better serve Horizon Link's future strategy. My name was on the list. I was being reassigned, again. This time not even to legacy ops, but to a temporary QA overflow team, a dumping ground basically, engineers who'd burned out, pissed off the wrong manager, or gotten too expensive to justify. The kind of assignment that screams, "You're not wanted here anymore." There was no meeting, no conversation, just the email and a new desk assignment shoved into a corner near the janitor's closet. People noticed. You could feel it in the way they avoided eye contact in the kitchen or stopped looping me in on emails. No more friendly check-ins, no more coffee invites. I wasn't Mike the engineer anymore. I was the guy whose name they whispered like it was cursed. It was humiliating. And the worst part? I still showed up, still did my job, still pushed code like a professional, even as they stripped away everything that made it feel meaningful. One afternoon, I ran into Lisa in the hallway. She looked surprised to see me. I asked her, flat out, what was going on. She gave me this look halfway between pity and discomfort and said, "Mike, sometimes things just shift. It's not personal." Not personal? She watched them steal from me, watched them erase my name, and now it wasn't personal. That night, Amber found me in the kitchen, sitting in the dark. I hadn't touched my dinner. "Quit," she said. "Just walk away." But I couldn't. Not yet. Because somewhere deep down I knew this wasn't over. They wanted me to disappear quietly, to take the hint, bow my head, and leave without a fight. But they underestimated something. See, when you've been humiliated that deeply, you either break or you start building something darker. I wasn't ready to fight, not yet, but I started watching, listening, gathering, because if they thought they'd buried me, they forgot one thing. I'm an engineer. I build from the ground up, even in silence. It was supposed to be just another Monday. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I overheard two guys from the finance team whispering. I wasn't eavesdropping. They were just loud enough and careless enough to let the wrong words slip. "The Phase Red licensing agreement just cleared 7 figures, one of them said, laughing. They actually bought it. Full package. Dan's team must be celebrating. 7 figures. My hand froze mid-pour. That was the moment I realized they didn't just steal my idea, they sold it. Phase Red, my algorithm, my blueprint, had been packaged, renamed, and licensed out to one of our strategic partners, a cloud infrastructure firm we'd worked with for years. Not only did they take the credit, they turned it into a cash machine, and I got nothing. Not a bonus, not a mention, not even a damn thank you. It hit me like whiplash. I walked back to my desk in a daze, sat down and stared at my screen while everything inside me screamed. This wasn't just about corporate politics anymore. This was theft. Grand, deliberate theft. And not just of money, but of years, of late nights, sacrificed weekends, of every ounce of pride I had left in that company. I started digging. Quietly, of course. I didn't want to raise any red flags. But I pulled public API logs, cross-referenced implementation dates, and even used my old credentials to peek into archived repositories. That's when I found it. The code, my code, had been copied line by line into a new private repo under a different project name. They changed a few comments, adjusted variable names, but the structure, the logic, the algorithms, it was all mine. And the commit history? Gone. Scrubbed, as if I had never touched it. That night, I went home and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror for what felt like hours. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was violated. Amber sat beside me in the living room and said, "You going to let them get away with this?" I shook my head, because in that moment something shifted inside me. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about principle, about justice. And if they thought I was going to take this lying down, they had no idea who they were messing with. I've always believed that the best engineers aren't just builders. We're observers. We see patterns, anomalies, things other people overlook. And when things go wrong, we trace the origin. So that's what I did. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into Daniel's office or confront Lisa in front of the team. That's what they were probably hoping for. An emotional outburst. Something they could write off as bitterness, maybe even a reason to fire me for unprofessional conduct. No. I played it smart. Phase 1 of the plan? Documentation, evidence, receipts. I started by cloning the last clean version of my code from a personal backup drive I kept at home. Yeah, I know. It's not exactly best practice to store company work off-network, but I had learned long ago to protect myself, and in this case that backup was gold. It had metadata, timestamps, commit histories, all showing the exact moments I'd written the original logic. It showed iterations, experiments, tests, things only someone who'd built it from scratch would have. Then I moved on to internal emails. I searched my inbox for every thread where Ghostframe had been discussed, especially the early days. Proposals I sent to Daniel, feedback he gave, meeting requests, shared documents. I archived them all, printed hard copies, uploaded them to an encrypted drive. The icing on the cake? Slack logs. I had at least 3 different conversations with Lisa and a junior engineer about Ghostframe before Daniel ever touched the project. In one of those threads, Lisa literally said, "This is brilliant, Mike. You should definitely present this to Dan." That one line was enough to crack their entire story. Still, that wasn't enough. I needed something indisputable, undeniable. So I started reviewing company calendar data, Zoom call histories, meeting recordings. One in particular stood out. A private meeting between me, Daniel, and Lisa from 3 months earlier. A technical walkthrough, where I explained the core compression logic using screen share. I remembered it because Daniel had said, "Don't worry about the recording, I'll just take notes." Except, he had recorded it. I found the auto-saved file on the shared drive, and there it was. Me walking them through the system, piece by piece. Daniel nodding. Lisa asking clarifying questions. My voice, my face, my work, captured. That was the moment I stopped feeling angry and started feeling calm. Because now I had ammunition, I had the evidence, code, emails, recordings, proof beyond doubt that I was the mind behind Ghostframe, and that Daniel and Lisa were frauds walking in someone else's shoes. But evidence isn't power if no one sees it. And that's when I remembered someone from my past. His name was Eric Coleman. We used to work together years ago at a small startup in Dallas. He was a back-end developer back then, bright, sarcastic, and always getting into trouble with upper management for saying exactly what he thought. We lost touch after the company folded. Turns out he'd pivoted. Now he was an investigative tech journalist, writing long-form exposés on data privacy, corporate fraud, and Silicon Valley corruption. His blog had grown into a full-blown media platform, and his recent piece had gone viral for calling out a major cloud provider's environmental violations. So I reached out. At first, I wasn't sure he'd remember me, but as soon as I messaged him, he replied within 5 minutes. "Mike Dawson, the guy who used to debug drunk at 2 a.m. during launches. Hell yeah, I remember you. What's up?" I didn't explain over text. We met the next day at a quiet bar just off 6th Street. I laid everything out, calmly, methodically. The stolen idea, the fake rebranding, the licensing deal, the recording. I watched his eyes widen. When I showed him the Zoom file, he just leaned back and whispered, "Holy shit." He asked me one question. "Do you want to ruin them or expose them?" I didn't even blink. "Both," Eric grinned. "Then let's do this right." That night, we built a plan. He would handle the media front, craft a story. Not a dramatic rant-filled blog post, but a tight, factual, evidence-based report. Something solid enough to catch fire in the tech world, and hard enough that even corporate PR couldn't snuff it out. Meanwhile, I'd stay quiet, gather more, watch for any panic moves from inside the company. We weren't going to scream into the void. We were going to drop a bomb so carefully packaged, so undeniably sourced, that when it exploded, no one could pretend they didn't hear it. They tried to erase my name. Now they were about to see it everywhere. Waiting is the hardest part. I had the evidence. I had Eric ready to blow the story wide open. I had the truth. But still, I waited. And that wait, it almost broke me. At work, nothing changed on the surface. Daniel kept walking through the halls like a tech messiah. Lisa kept running meetings with that same calculated calm, like she hadn't sold her soul for a LinkedIn headline. They didn't know what I had. Not yet. And every day I sat at my little desk, pushing JIRA tickets and pretending not to hear the whispers. Every time I heard Phase Red mentioned in a meeting, I clenched my jaw so tight I'd leave the room with a headache. Some nights, I'd open the recording file and just play the first 5 seconds, hear my own voice explaining the algorithm, remind myself it was real. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't making it up. But there were moments late at night when the house was quiet and Amber was asleep, where I wanted to blow it all up. Just drop the files online, post the recording on Reddit, tag reporters, burn the whole house down with one click. It would have felt good, for a second. But revenge isn't about the explosion. It's about the silence after the dust settles. It's about making sure no one forgets who lit the match. So I waited. Instead of acting out, I started preparing for the second phase. I met with a lawyer, quietly, discreetly, a friend of a friend who specialized in IP and workplace retaliation. When I told him what I had, he didn't say much at first. Just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If even half of what you're telling me is true, they're screwed." That helped. Still, the emptiness didn't go away. I was doing everything right, taking the high road, but it felt like walking on glass barefoot, knowing every step was one more second they were still getting away with it. There's a part of you when you've been betrayed this deeply that just wants to make someone hurt. Not just lose, hurt. Feel what you felt, live what they made you live. But I wasn't going to waste this on impulse. They stole from me with calculation. So I would return the favor with precision. It all started with a headline. Eric published the article on a quiet Thursday morning. No fanfare, no teaser. Just a clean title on a respected independent tech journal. Exclusive internal algorithm may have been misattributed in Horizon Link's 14 Melters licensing deal. It didn't name names. It didn't point fingers. But it had teeth. The article broke down the timeline, clean, methodical, undeniable. It described how a compression algorithm credited to a senior executive had shown development patterns suggesting someone else had authored it entirely. It included anonymous screenshots of commit logs, vague references to internal Slack messages, and mentions of a whistleblower in communication with legal counsel. No sensationalism, just cold, calculated suspicion wrapped in hard facts. Within hours, it spread. Tech forums picked it up first, then Reddit, then a mid-tier industry blog reposted it, quoting a few paragraphs with the title, "Is Horizon Link's crown jewel built on stolen code?" Suddenly, I wasn't crazy anymore. I watched from my desk as the company's Slack channels buzzed like a kicked beehive. Developers were sending each other links in private threads. PMs were unusually quiet. Legal issued a vague internal statement that read like it had been written in panic mode. "We are aware of unverified claims circulating online and are conducting an internal review. Employees are advised not to comment." The fear was visible. And Daniel, he didn't show up to work that day. Lisa ran the morning scrum alone, visibly tense. She kept glancing at her phone, skipping over anything infrastructure-related. She didn't even look at me. Good. Because that was the point. This wasn't about destroying them in one blow. It was about shaking the floor beneath them so hard they didn't know which way was up. It was about control, letting the silence speak louder than confrontation ever could. By Friday, investors had started calling. Eric forwarded me a message he got from a hedge fund manager asking for any additional details on the authorship claim. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the real explosion hadn't happened. This was just the pressure build-up. I wanted them paranoid, looking over their shoulders, making mistakes, because while they were scrambling to patch the hole, I was already loading the next round. By Monday morning, the office was a different place. People weren't laughing at their desks anymore. The usual hum of casual conversation had been replaced by whispers and cautious glances. It felt like a storm was brewing, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The article had done its job. Now it was the investors asking questions. 2 of the board members called in for a surprise meeting with the leadership team. Compliance teams that had been invisible for years were suddenly scheduling audits. It quietly started restricting access to certain logs and folders, including ones I had created years ago. It was like watching a house of cards begin to sway in slow motion. But the most satisfying part? Daniel Kravitz finally crawled out of whatever hole he'd been hiding in, furious. I heard from a colleague in HR that he'd brought in Horizon Link's legal team and had already contacted Eric's publisher, threatening defamation and legal action if the post wasn't taken down. Eric called me that night laughing so hard he could barely speak. They actually said, "We'll sue you if you don't retract it." I said, "Retract what exactly?" We never named anyone. And then they just froze. Because that was the beauty of it. We hadn't accused. We'd revealed. And the people who knew they were guilty, they were outing themselves through their own fear. The pressure kept building. That week, 3 engineers on Daniel's team requested transfers. 2 clients called requesting clarification on the licensing process behind FazeRed. And then Lisa cracked. I saw her outside the building on Thursday, phone glued to her ear, pacing in tight, frantic circles. She looked nothing like the polished PM I used to know. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what it was about. You can't fake that kind of fear. They had built their little kingdom on lies, and now every stone they'd laid was crumbling. I wasn't done yet, though, because while they were busy calling lawyers, spinning PR statements, and whispering about damage control, I was sitting quietly with my attorney. And we were preparing something they couldn't spin. Not a blog post, not an internal leak, a lawsuit, and not just for credit, not just to embarrass them. I was going after what they really cared about, their money, their reputation, their power. When I walked into my lawyer's office that morning, something had changed. This wasn't just an idea anymore. This wasn't theoretical. This was war, and I was ready to file. We sat across from each other in his glass-paneled downtown office, the city skyline behind us like a reminder of just how high these people thought they were sitting. I had a binder in my lap, code commits, internal emails, Slack threads, proposal drafts, the Zoom recording, proof, all of it neatly organized and time-stamped. My lawyer flipped through it slowly, page by page, like he was handling evidence from a crime scene. When he got to the screenshot of Lisa's Slack message, "This is brilliant, Mike," he exhaled sharply and said, "They're done. They just don't know it yet." We filed 2 complaints that day, one for intellectual property theft based on the repackaging and licensing of Ghost Frame without my involvement or consent, and one for retaliatory demotion, for the calculated way I'd been pushed out of the project, then reassigned to meaningless work after raising internal concerns. The lawsuit hit public record by 3 p.m. By 5 p.m., Horizon Link's stock had dropped 3%. By the end of the week, 4% more. That's when the real panic began. Investors weren't just worried about the lawsuit, they were terrified of what else might come out. FazeRed was their golden goose. It had already been used in 2 high-profile partnerships and announced as a key driver in the next quarter's projections. Now it was radioactive. Emails started flying. The board issued an emergency statement saying they took the allegations seriously and would launch a third-party investigation. Too little, too late, because when money's involved, fear spreads like wildfire. A senior VP resigned for personal reasons. One of the top clients paused a renewal deal. Internal departments stopped replying to FazeRed integration requests, and the word moratorium started showing up in memos. They weren't just scared of being wrong. They were scared of being caught knowing they were wrong. Daniel? Silent. Not a word. Lisa? Nowhere to be found on team calls. They thought I'd stay quiet forever, that I'd take the hit, disappear, and let them rise. But now they couldn't stop the fall, even if they tried, because the machine they built on my back, it was turning on them. And I was just getting started. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. No grand gestures, no shouting matches, just silence, suits, and the low hum of strategy. But underneath all that stillness, you could feel it, the pressure, like the air itself was waiting to see who'd blink first. I sat there in a navy suit that Amber picked out. She told me I looked like a man about to take back what was his. And honestly, I did feel powerful. But I was also exhausted. Months of planning, gathering, waiting. This was it. Across the room, Daniel sat at the defense table, jaw tight, eyes scanning nothing. Lisa was next to him, shoulders hunched, no longer the confident PM who used to own every meeting. Their lawyer, a high-dollar, sharp-tongued woman, looked calm, but I could see the nerves behind her polished performance. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, clean, confident, and methodical. He began walking the court through the sequence. My original proposal, the sudden silence, the code commits, the licensing deal. You could see the shift in the room as the dots began connecting. Then he said 6 words that made everything stop. "Your Honor, we have a recording." Every head turned. The judge gave a small nod. "Proceed." We played it. It was the Zoom call. The one Daniel said didn't exist. There I was on screen, tired eyes, hoodie, explaining compression logic in painful detail. Walking them through the system, slide by slide, variable by variable. And then came the moment. Daniel's voice, crystal clear, leaned into the mic and said, "Let's not mention his name just yet. We'll handle the credits later." The courtroom froze. You could feel it, that quiet shift when everyone realizes the game has changed. Even the judge tilted her head slightly. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, chain of custody, context, whatever. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. They lied. They erased. And now, they were exposed. Lisa's face went white. Daniel stared forward like he'd seen a ghost. And me? I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, calm, steady, while the truth finally echoed through a room where no one could pretend it didn't exist anymore. The courtroom took a recess. People whispered, reporters scribbled, and I knew this wasn't just a hearing. It was their ending. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the time court resumed, Daniel and Lisa were no longer sitting like confident executives defending a misunderstanding. They looked exactly like what they were, guilty, exposed, and terrified. The board acted quickly. Within 48 hours, Daniel was placed on indefinite leave pending further review. Lisa officially resigned, though everyone knew she had been pushed out the back door before she could pack her desk. The press was relentless. Headlines popped up everywhere. Whistleblower exposes stolen IP in 14mm tech scandal. CTO ousted amid mounting evidence of algorithm theft. The engineer they tried to erase. Suddenly, people started treating me differently, not with fear, but with respect. The kind that doesn't come from a title or a corner office, but from being the guy who didn't fold, who stood up and held the line. And then, something strange happened. Horizon Link reached out. A board member called and asked if I'd be open to a conversation. They offered to settle the lawsuit, of course, a generous sum, full public acknowledgement, and even a return to my old role with a promotion attached. But I didn't even hesitate. I told them, "Thanks, but I don't work for thieves, not even the ones who clean house afterward." That was the moment I closed that chapter for good. But the story didn't end there, because what I didn't tell them, and what they didn't see coming, was that during those months of chaos and silence, I hadn't just been building a case, I'd been building something else. See, when Eric published that article, the visibility it gave me, it changed everything. I started getting emails, messages, DMs from engineers, developers, even investors. One in particular stood out, a former venture capitalist who said, "If you're planning to build your own thing, I want in." And that's exactly what I did. Quietly, I filed the paperwork, started a small ethical software firm focused on back-end infrastructure and dev rights. No politics, no credit games, just innovation, transparency, and talent. Within 3 months, I had poached 3 of Horizon Link's top engineers. People who left the company the second Daniel's lies came to light. They came to me not because I was offering more money, but because I offered something rare in this industry: integrity. And in the world of tech, that's worth more than any algorithm. 6 months later, I walked into my own office. It wasn't fancy, no skyline views or espresso machines, just a second-floor space above a co-working hub in East Austin with exposed brick, second-hand chairs, and a humming AC that only worked on one side of the room. But it was mine. The company we built, Frame One Systems, was small, agile, and honest. We didn't have flashy marketing or billion-dollar funding rounds. What we had was a reputation, a real one. Word spread fast. Turns out in an industry sick of stolen credit and bloated egos, there's a market for people who do the right thing. Clients came in steadily, startups, non-profits, even a few enterprise defectors looking for cleaner partnerships. And the best part? Some of the investors who once ignored my emails at Horizon Link, the ones who backed Daniel and sat through his presentations using my charts, were now reaching out to me, asking if they could schedule a meeting. Funny how quiet people get when they realize they bet on the wrong horse. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to, because my revenge didn't come from watching Daniel get fired, or watching Lisa scrub her LinkedIn profile clean. It came from something deeper. It came from walking into work every day knowing no one could take credit for what I'd built, from creating a space where no engineer ever had to worry about being erased, from watching my team present their own ideas and get the applause they earned. Sometimes late at night I still think about that moment in the courtroom, that split second of silence after Daniel's voice filled the room, revealing everything. It wasn't just proof, it was justice. They tried to delete me, reassign me, reduce me, but I didn't break. I rebuilt. And I made sure that when they looked back, when they searched for the guy they once tried to bury, they wouldn't find a cautionary tale. They'd find a name. Michael Dawson, the man who they underestimated, the man who took everything they stole and turned it into something they could never touch again. Enjoyed the story? Drop a comment if you've ever been betrayed and came back stronger. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories just like this, because in the end, revenge is best served strategically.